There's a moment right before fear takes over when the heart skips a beat, the breath stops, and something ancient inside you whispers, "Run." But what if you couldn't run? What if something made you stay frozen in place when everything in you screamed to move? That's the terror behind Stephen King's bone-chilling psychological thriller, Never Flinch. It's not about monsters lurking under the bed. It's about the ones sitting across from you at the dinner table wearing a smile. This isn't just a horror novel. It's a test of will, a story that asks what happens when flinching means losing everything. The story begins in a sleepy New Hampshire town, the kind of place where nothing much happens and people are proud of it. But everything changes the day Dr. Marianne Holtz arrives. A trauma psychologist running from her own past, she moves into the town, hoping to start over. She buys a crumbling Victorian house on the edge of town, known by locals as the Hollis Place, a house that hasn't had a permanent resident in 20 years. No one talks about why not directly, but the warnings are always the same. Don't stay past dark. Don't let the lights go out. And whatever you do, never flinch. At first, Marianne brushes it off as superstition, a broken community trying to hold on to old ghost stories. But the house is strange. The lights flicker even with new wiring. Shadows appear where they shouldn't. The air feels heavy like it's watching her. Still, she refuses to leave. She's a doctor, a rational woman. She believes everything has an explanation. Until the first night, she dreams of a boy with no eyes, standing at the foot of her bed, whispering her name. As Marianne starts digging into the history of the house and the town, she discovers a string of disappearances dating back to 1957, all linked to the same location. Children gone without a trace, adults vanishing after reporting odd behavior, family pets turning up mutilated in the woods. At the center of it all is a man named Jacob Vale, a former hypnotist and mentalist who lived in the Hollis Place during the 60s, and whose final public performance ended with 2 audience members institutionalized and 1 dead by suicide. Jacob disappeared soon after, but his legacy is stitched into the fabric of the town's fear. Marianne begins to record her sessions as her own grip on reality starts to slip. Her patients begin reporting similar visions of the boy with no eyes. One girl, a mute since birth, suddenly screams in terror after a session, clawing at her own face and repeating a single phrase over and over: "Never flinch, never flinch, never flinch." The phrase begins to haunt Marianne. She writes it on sticky notes, pins it to the fridge, and repeats it to herself, like a mantra. But the more she says it, the more it feels like a command coming from somewhere else. The book shifts its focus to a second protagonist, Detective Cole Branner, a recently suspended homicide investigator battling alcoholism and the ghosts of his past. He's lured back into the fold when his estranged sister, one of Marianne's patients, is found wandering the woods barefoot and bloody, unable to remember how she got there. She can't speak, but she writes the same 2 words over and over on the hospital walls with her own blood. Never flinch. Branner visits Marianne, who is now visibly unraveling. Her speech is clipped, her hands tremble, and she claims the house is trying to get inside her head. But she's not leaving. She insists she's close to uncovering something ancient, something bigger than her. She believes the house is a vessel, a psychic amplifier for trauma and fear, and that Jacob Vale was merely the first to understand how to use it. Branner doesn't believe her until he sleeps inside the house for one night and wakes up covered in scratches and dirt with no memory of the night. From here, the novel spirals into a dual descent. On one side, Marianne's obsession drives her deeper into the house's secrets. She unearths Vale's journals, which are less writing and more fragmented commands, layered with sigils and mind-altering instructions. The journals reference something called the Still One, an entity that feeds on attention and fear that punishes movement with madness. Vale writes, "If you move, it sees you. If you react, it knows you. If you flinch, it takes you." On the other side, Branner tries to piece together the town's buried history through interviews and public records. He discovers a cult that operated under the name the Still Circle in the 60s that believed in achieving power through emotional control. Their rituals involved inducing extreme fear and resisting it completely. Those who failed became offerings. Branner realizes the cult didn't disband. It went underground, and its members now sit in places of power. A few are even on the town council. They've built a world where fear is currency and the house is their temple. As the novel accelerates toward its final act, Branner and Marianne team up though their trust in each other frays with every passing hour. The house begins to manipulate their perceptions, making them doubt what's real and what isn't. Branner sees his dead daughter in the mirrors. Marianne finds herself speaking in Vale's voice when she sleeps. They discover a sealed room in the basement behind a false wall filled with old 8mm tapes, all labeled with names of the missing. They watch the tapes and see children being subjected to hypnosis and psychic torment, while Jacob Vale watches silently, always mouthing the same words, "Never flinch." In the climax, the house goes dark. All power fails, and a storm traps them inside. The walls begin to bleed light, and time bends. They are no longer sure if it's night or day. The boy with no eyes returns now with a mouth that opens too wide, whispering not just their names, but their thoughts. Marianne realizes the entity isn't a ghost, but a psychic parasite, a thought form created by decades of fear and abuse fed by the mind of Jacob Vale and every victim who came after. To defeat it, they must do the one thing that feels impossible: face it without fear, without a single flinch. The final chapters are a test of endurance as the house floods their minds with hallucinations, their worst memories, their buried guilt. Branner is forced to relive the night his daughter died, unable to save her. Marianne confronts the abuse she suffered as a child, which led her to psychology. They hold hands in the center of the sealed basement as the entity circles them, invisible but everywhere, and together they repeat the phrase like a shield: "Never flinch, never flinch, never flinch." And then silence. The house goes still. The air clears. The lights return. The entity is gone. Not destroyed, but starved. Without fear, without reaction, it has nothing to feed on. In the epilogue, Marianne leaves the house for good and returns to Boston to publish a book about her experience. Disguised as fiction, Branner checks himself into rehab. The house remains standing empty again, waiting. And on the last page, we see a new family moving in with a young girl who pauses at the door and tilts her head as if hearing something no one else can. She smiles, and the words come softly, almost like a lullaby: "Never flinch." Never Flinch is not just a horror novel. It's a study in control, in silence, in the power of refusing to give in to fear. It's one of King's most psychological works to date, not filled with gore, but with dread, with the slow crawl of madness and the terrifying strength it takes to resist it. It doesn't ask you to scream or run. It dares you to stand still. So if you're ready to experience a horror that doesn't leap from the shadows, but grows from the inside, then Never Flinch is the story for you. Just remember, keep your breathing steady, don't blink, and above all else, never, ever flinch. If you want to listen full audiobook for free, link in description.